Thank you for joining us on another month of Alum Spotlight. This month is special for me personally because it's a very good friend of mine, a longtime friend of mine. Many of our audience probably knows of him or knows him personally, Steve Latta. We go back to, U11? When we played for Fire FC. We were with Fire FC before Fire FC was even Fire FC. Back in the GMYSA for you old timers out there listening and or watching to this Alum Spotlight. So Steve, without further ado, how about you give a more thorough intro than what I've given, and give our audience maybe a taste of who are you and what involvement did you have with GMYSA/Fire FC?
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Latta. I grew up in Grand Junction, Colorado. My family immigrated to Grand Junction, Colorado, a couple generations before me from Mexico. And so I was born and raised in Grand Junction. My early soccer experience was through GMYSA, through the recreational program, and then segued into the competitive program. So me and Nick got to know each other once we got into the competitive space. Obviously, got to know some of the players when I was in recreation. I feared a number of those guys when playing in them in the recreational space. And then we got into the competitive realm and actually got to be good friends and teammates with a number of the guys. So early on experience in, playing over at, I think it was Chatfield Elementary, is where the recreation used to take place. So definitely got a lot of good repetition in there. And then once it was time to kind of dip my toe in the pool of competitive setting, my mom was very unfamiliar, came from a family that wasn't really familiar with athletics. So when I got dropped off with my water bottle and my cleats to try out for the competitive side, I was very green in that sense, but had played a lot of soccer, be it in the street or recreation or what have you. So I felt like I had a good amount of passion at that point. And then just once we got in the competitive setting, just kind of grew in that space and got to know a lot of the families and coaches. Obviously, the coaches and the directors at that time had a big influence on kind of what my passion drive was at that time. So names, just to name drop a few, we had Peter Hemmendinger that was kind of running the club. We had Travis McCorkle as well. I still keep in touch with Travis McCorkle, who is now a college coach, I believe down in the Arizona, New Mexico area. So still keep in touch with Coach McCorkle through social media. So he was a big influence on my experience as well, just because it was something to look up to. These guys that were big, strong, fast, knew how to strike a ball and, their experiences. So just got to see that kind of stuff. And I think especially on the boys side, giving boys something to emulate and to imitate is something huge. I think girls have a little bit different of a development experience sometimes, but that's something that I definitely got from a Grand Junction soccer culture early on. And then it just built into college, got some exposures in the professional space, and then got into coaching. So that's pretty much my intro. I'm born and bred there in Grand Junction. And quite frankly, if I still had the same kind of opportunities there that I have here in the Denver metro area, I would probably still be in Grand Junction. So my family's still there. So I still enjoy the Grand Junction area. So.
Fair enough. Hey, can you speak to our audience a little bit about what it was like? Because it wasn't just 2 years ago, right, that you and I were playing club. What were maybe some things that stuck with you, whether they're different from nowadays or maybe they're the same, but what are things maybe that you miss or again, things that have just always stayed with you about growing up and playing club for Fire FC, formerly GMYSA?
For me, it was just finding a home. For me, like soccer for me has always been a vehicle to get me to where I want to be, not just in the soccer space, but also in life. When I was younger, I grew up in one of the neighborhoods. It wasn't nearly as affluent, was a little bit rougher on the edges. So when I first started the recreational experience with GMYSA, I was a kid that was playing soccer in the streets. So in my neighborhood, mostly Hispanic families, definitely not affluent in that regard. So, when it came time to play, we didn't have iPads and cell phones and stuff like that. So, in the evening time after school, I would go a couple blocks over from my grandma's house because that was where I spent a lot of my time since my mom was working long hours. And then I would play soccer in the streets until the street lights came on. Usually when the street lights came on, my mom can whistle really loud and she would whistle from a couple blocks over to get me to head home. But once I got into the recreational space, I didn't stop doing that. Once I was able to have recreational training to like once or twice a week, my grandmother would would help me warm up for practice, which is a good experience. I'd get home from school. She'd help me knock a ball around a bit. And then she would drive me to wherever my recreational practice was. And then oddly enough, if my mom was still working, my grandma would pick me up again and then bring me back to my neighborhood. And then I would swap out of my cleats, put on my tennis shoes, and then go 2 blocks over and play some more soccer. So the recreational space for the GMYSA provided me was more structured than I had. Instead of, picking out bowls between that van and that rose bush, it was giving me some formal training with some good mentorship that helped me kind of just grow the passion for the game. But I definitely feel like my experience had a little bit more culture, just because I don't think a lot of my teammates had a neighborhood where they played pickup soccer with kids of all ages, boys and girls, and, would just kick around and kick up dust a bit. So I think the GMYSA gave me a formal experience into the soccer space. And then once I think coaches started realizing that I had a little bit more grit than some of the other players, then I started to shine. Right. And then once the conversation started being had about, hey, you need to try out for competitive, it's coming up for your age group, that was something I didn't know anything about. So it was definitely a blessing for me to have coaches and mentors that were able to facilitate the passion that I already had and the culture that I was already growing in the soccer area of my life. And so the club was a huge a facilitator in giving me a space to kind of be a part of my identity. That makes
Yep.
sense.
Yep. How about fast forward a few years into 14, 15, even into high school? Anything sit with you from those years? Again, I'll speak to it a little bit, but I want you to kind of have first dibs just for yourself, selfishly, to say anything stick out for you.
Shoot, once we got into the teenage years, I think so much of the culture of a team and an age group is hugely vital. I think one of the primary reasons I work so hard in that space is because I didn't want to let my teammates down.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It was just one of those things to where I felt like if I had people that relied on me, then I would work harder and
Yeah.
I would put in more repetition, stuff like
Yep.
that. So definitely it was once I got to the teenage years, it was definitely experience to say it wasn't just my passion pursuit. It was how can I help others?
Yeah.
So if I was good at something, I was going to help others be good at something, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and speaking of that, I can remember you were a go-to for me when it came to putting in some of that extra work. It was
Mhm,
so
mhm.
normal for us. I feel like probably to train twice a week,
Right.
and you were newsflash for our audience. We didn't have cell phones when you and I were 15, 16 years
Right.
old. It was the landline saying, "Hey, Steve, what's
Right.
going on? Do you want to literally go to Canyon View?" And it'd be rainy, it'd be windy, it'd be sunny, it'd be
Right.
hot, it'd be
Absolutely.
meh. And it's like, we just ping a
Hmm.
ball. And sometimes it'd be
Hmm.
30 minutes and sometimes it'd be an hour and a half. And
Hmm.
that that's definitely something that stuck with me.
Yeah.
That you were always one of the few, for a time, just to always say yes. And
Hmm.
then again, I'll speak to us growing up in that high school dynamic a little bit. We were unique, I remember, because we had 14 of us on the same club
Hmm.
team, but also the same high school, going to
Right.
Junction High. And it was so easy to facilitate just pick up, right? On
Hmm.
all those summer days, especially between the spring and fall seasons. And again, it's picking up the phone that we didn't have text messaging, but it was navigating and facilitating. Hey, when are you getting off work? We're going to head out at this time, and shoot, it'd be 2.5 hours, 3 hours without batting an eye. That we would
Absolutely.
switch up the teams. We would play small sided. We make it big sided. I don't know, just all
Hmm.
kinds of formats. That's something that's always stuck with me over the years to say that was different. That was a bit
Hmm.
unique. I'll roll that into Brazil because so many of us had that opportunity. We were, I say you and I personally were part of that very first, I mean, from not to make it all about us, but we started the Brazil thing, right?
Right.
It was you, me, and
Hmm.
one of our other teammates, Jamie, that
Hmm.
were the first three from Grand Junction to go with Peter abroad to
Hmm.
Brazil, and then that became a thing for a
Right.
time for our club. Speak to that a little bit in terms of how that has stayed with you, and maybe even go into your opportunities that came out of that on the back end, fast forwarding a few years.
I would say, shoot, that opportunity for me gave me a little bit more verification in regards to the culture side. Um, which I think has to be a big proponent of anybody's driven pursuit, doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter if you're learning piano, if you're playing soccer, if you have a little bit more of a cultural connection to the experience, then it gives you more joy, if that makes sense. Right. And shoot, when I was growing up, the only kind of outside soccer culture exposure I really had, obviously, I come from a Hispanic background. So there's a lot of, Mexican soccer culture that I was exposed to, watching the Mexican league and stuff like that and following certain players when I was really little. And, like Hugo Sanchez playing for Real Madrid. And, those are kind of the early names from the Mexican culture. But then in addition to that, one of the early cable channels that I had exposure to was Goal TV. And so after games or trainings or whatever, I would always, if I had time on the TV where I had my time, I would switch it to Goal TV and I would just watch soccer to no end. And what that did is it exposed me to cultures that I was not familiar with. I watched the Italian league. I watched the Argentinian league. I watched, so many different exposures from around the world to where, a goal gets scored and you see people climbing fences and popping smoke bombs and people just the roar of a crowd in those cultural spaces was something that totally like shook me. And so our opportunity to go overseas and go all the way to another continent, actually get firsthand experience with that kind of culture where you go, oh my goodness, like this is real, right? You see it from a distance and you're like, that would be really cool. And then the fact that you get to get front row seats to that, either at professional games that we went to or trainings that we had, or just playing against players that are in and around your age and seeing their skill level and their speed of play. And it makes you go, whoa, like it makes you understand that you might be a big fish, small pond where you're at, but there's somebody out there that's putting in more time. There's somebody out there that's enjoying it more. There's somebody out there that's prioritizing just the kick around idea more than you are. Right. And we got I think so much of our experience in those early trips was trading cleats and trading, shoe bags and shirts with these people that were less fortunate, or they just wanted to exchange culture. And that was a huge driver in me kind of saying, yeah, just because we don't have that big of a massive culture where you're at doesn't mean it's not out there. And for me, some of the conversations and connections we made in that space obviously facilitated you being able to go later on in life and get that professional exposure. And then same thing with me. It was just, it made me comfortable with later on in life, once I got into the college age, to say, okay, I'm going to hop a flight. Hey, I don't know anybody there right now. I know I have my connections and I know who I'm flying in to meet. But aside from that, I've been there before. The culture has welcomed me before. And I'm just going to hop on a jet and here I go. Right. And see and roll the dice and see what I can do in that space. And obviously the connections we made in those early trips paid dividend just because it allowed you and me and speaking just for myself, it allowed me to showcase what I'm about, showcase kind of what I've worked on the entire time. And it was kind of interesting for me because the experience I had in the professional realm was, this is a job, right? I would be, working or speaking to the reserve players in that professional space. And a number of them were on a pathway to help provide for their family. Whereas here I am coming from a cultural side and an American side, feeling like I didn't have too much just because my family wasn't, all well off, but come to find out these guys were well worse off and they were working their butts off to provide for their family. Right. They're saying, hey, I'm good at this. So I'm going to try and make money and try and provide for my kids or my parents or my cousins and grandparents, what have you. And so me coming in, just being like, wow, this is exciting. And I'm a pretty good player and I think I can hang. And then having to go up against somebody who's literally hungry, who's literally trying to feed hungry mouths. That's a different level of competition that not many people get to experience, right? When it's come time to chase down a 50-50 ball, when you're up against somebody who's trying to feed somebody's empty mouth, that's different, right? And then I definitely got exposure to the fact that it is a job, and you can enjoy it, and you're meant to enjoy it because it's sport. But when it's a job like that, you can get fired. And then what I was able to take from that experience is when I came back, whatever somebody asked me, hey, especially some of the older boys that I would work with, they would say, hey, do you think I'm good enough to be a professional? And I wouldn't try and crush their dreams, but I would say no, and this is why. And then one of the primary reasons why is that I would try and elaborate to some of these players from my experience is if you need legal help, you hire a professional. If you need if you have a plumbing problem, you hire a professional. Whereas if you think you're good enough to play soccer, do you think you're good enough for somebody to pay you to do it? Like if they need a result, if they need better defense, if they need better execution in the midfield, if they need somebody to go score goals, do you think you're good enough for somebody to write you a check? And I think that putting things in that perspective for some of these players. And the great thing is one of these players that I had a conversation with and really alluded to the fact that he really didn't get enough individual repetition in his own time. A couple of weeks later, driving by Canyon, he was getting his repetition on his own time, right? Because he goes, okay, there's a reality check for me. Let me do what I need to do to be sharp enough to be paid to play. And I think that's the biggest thing is that I think every soccer player maybe has a pipe dream to play professional, maybe play for their high school, play for their college. But not only are you in competition for yourself, but you're also in competition for those that are also getting a repetition alongside of you or ahead of you, or they're taking more time to do so. And once you get to the professional realm, it's way more, there's a level of execution that you can get to that I didn't even think I could get to. And I'm talking just extremes like, hey, we're no longer shooting on the corners of the goal. You have to hit that road cone in the corner of the goal, and being pushed to that level to where you can hit that 8 times out of 10 is something that everybody's capable of, but I don't think everybody fully understands how much repetition it takes to take you to that. And I think the passion and the culture and stuff like that early experiences I had through my development helped me be resilient to do those things. But do I think people have the mental strength to do those things? Not everybody. It takes a lot of failure. It takes a lot of repetition, which is why I'm a huge advocate of individual sessions, because individual sessions are going to put you in a space where you're getting structured mentorship. You're just playing, right? You're just getting extra repetition, but you have somebody who's saying, hey, based on your goals, this isn't good enough, right? And it's not to say to put you down, but it puts things in better perspective as to what is necessary for that, if that makes sense. So my experience in the tours that we did when we were younger were exciting. It helped me with the cultural piece. It helped me grow my passion. But then once we got into the actual competition phase, it was kind of a reality check. I remember riding on one of the team buses from one of our training locations to another and just kind of watching the neighborhoods go by and kind of having a full and firm realization that this is not just fun anymore, that it's a job and it's time to execute, right? Or you can get fired. And I don't think that a lot of kids in their pipe dream realize that that's what it is, because a huge percentage of professionals in this world aren't on TV. They're not making the Ferrari money. And I think that the glitz and glam of the EPL and the top leagues, I think kids think that that's what professional players are, but there's probably a huge percentage of professional players that aren't making that much money, and they're putting in a lot of time and they're doing the best they can. And they're in the lower divisions and they play as long as they can. And then they get injured and then that's how it works out. But just as long as they understand that the professional pursuit is a long, hard road, and maybe you don't get to the shining lights of the EPL or one of the top leagues, but you can be a professional. It just depends to what regard.
Sure. So two things that stick with me based on what you just said. One, what would be the advice then that you would give to that? Maybe they're that 8th grader, that freshman in high school. They're just like, I want to go pro. Steve, you've had some of that exposure. What would be your best advice to that kid right now? They've got time and that's their goal. What would be your 1 or 2 pieces to say, focus on this right now, because that's within your control?
I would say question how much you actually enjoy it. That's number one. I think your enjoyment of striking a ball and shooting on frame and playing with your teammates and playing the game and watching it on TV and putting on a jersey and picking, getting excited about a new pair of cleats and getting excited about the new release by Adidas and having banter about this player and that player and professional player. And, I've seen him do this. I want to try and do this. And he's so good at finding space and stuff like that. Those are the things because I'm a big advocate of culture, and that is culture for me. That is what's going to get you to contact a coach to do an individual session. That's what's going to get you to contact your teammates when you have an off weekend to say, hey, I'm going to get a hold of some pug goals and 3 or 4 balls and a few cones that I got at Ross or Dick's, and we're just going to go play, right? I don't think it has to, and the biggest thing with American culture is that a lot of soccer players only play soccer when it's time to play soccer. And one of the coaches that I had in Brazil put it, obviously this is in Portuguese, but he put it in perspective for me where he said, are you a soccer player or do you play soccer? And the biggest difference between those two is somebody who plays soccer is just somebody who goes, oh, it's scheduled. Here I go. Right. And then after that, then they go do gymnastics or they get back on their iPad or they focus on fantasy football or something. Right. A true soccer player understands that training is what you should enjoy the most. Training is what you should do, what you should look for, those opportunities. What can you get better at? And then the games are just showtime to showcase, right? Just like a thespian who might be trying to be an actor or be on Broadway. Their rehearsals is where they get their enjoyment. They get their culture, they get their friendships, they get their connections and mentorships. And then when they actually have time for the play, that's their showtime, right? And then the lights come on and they show everybody what they've worked on. That's the same thing as a soccer game. And I think that's the biggest thing is if I'm speaking to an eighth grader or somebody who's in those age groups and say, hey, I want to be professional, I go, number one, how much do you enjoy it? How much of the culture are you actually involved in? And then from there, how much drive do you have to seek out additional opportunities in training? Are you asking to train with the older age group once a week? If you're a girl, are you asking to train with boys every now and then? Are you setting up pickup? Everybody has a cell phone now. Just make a mass text list. I know a lot of the boys and girls now, once they get to middle school age and they have cell phones, they have group text. Or do they sit there and banter back and forth with each other about different stuff? Or do they actually talk about getting together and pinging a ball? Whenever I have individual sessions and I've worked 1 or 2 sessions with kids, one of the most important things I ask players, I say, what is the best Christmas gift or birthday gift a true soccer player would ask for? And they go, cleats. I was like, sure, if you need them. How about a bag of balls, right? How many kids actually ask for a bag of balls? They don't have to be super expensive to where if they go to shoot on frame by themselves, they're not having to chase every time. To where if they're going to get together with teammates, they're not upset because there's only 2 soccer balls and this is annoying because we have to keep checking. Like help facilitate your environment and your enjoyment, right? And that's the biggest thing is how much culture do you have? How much repetition are you actually looking for? And if you enjoy it, you're going to want those extra opportunities. And then different coaches are going to say, wow, he's really got it. Or she's really got it, and then it's going to be smiles all around. Yep. Or they're going to give you some constructive feedback, or you're going to have a reality check. If you're a female player, you go train with some boys that are maybe at the same group or maybe a little higher or whatever. And you go, whoa, it can be faster. I can be more aggressive, and it gets you more comfortable in that space. Or if you're a boy player, are you asking to train with the age group up? On an off night, are you asking to get extra training? Are you going out and so it gives you better perspective as to the different limit that you can get used to, right? You get little tastes of the different limits you can get used to. And if you do that enough, you might get asked to guest play. And then you get thrown into the mix against other competition. And then surprise, surprise, you're one of the shining stars on your team, but you're also guest playing for another team, so on and so forth. So it stacks on top of each other. But enjoyment and culture is the foundation of that. How much do you actually enjoy it? If you are eager to get out of soccer practice or after a game to go watch an NFL game instead of watch a soccer game, that's a problem, right? And just as long as I put that in a practical perspective for players, then I think they get a little bit more, either they adjust their direction or they go, yeah, maybe I'm really not that into it, right? Yep. Because being a professional player, not only are you joining a race where there's a lot of fish swimming in that sea, but you're also joining a race where you have to put in a lot of time and you have to enjoy it. So, yeah.
You also mentioned one other thing from a mental standpoint. You feel like you have to be able to deal with quite a bit of failure. You said, can you elaborate a little bit on that idea for, again, those that are trying to navigate their journeys, their individual journeys to say, I want to see how far I can go in this game and how many opportunities I can facilitate or I can create for myself. What's your best, I guess, advice, for lack of a better term, in that sense, when it comes to the mental side of things as they pursue higher levels?
Mm-hmm. So for me, in my personal experience, I mean, I'm 5'0", 5'5", 5'6", and I've never been the biggest player. But one of the reasons I was identified in the competitive setting at U11 was because I was aggressive, right? That was one of my fortes. And then my technique got better. And then my speed of play got better. And then I could play multiple positions and I could do this, that, and the other. But on top of that, I got told no a lot. I got told, probably midway through my experience with the Fire Club, the club in Grand Junction. I would say midway through, there was, we were getting to early teenage years, and there were some kids that kind of bullied each other, and we didn't get along, and then the coaches didn't get along, and so on and so forth. So I found myself on the second team for 2 seasons, and I think that because of my immaturity, I could have said, "Oh, I'm going to quit," right? But I was like, no, like this is ridiculous. Like I belong on the first team, and I'm going to stick with it. And then I found myself back on the first team, right? But there was a season or two there where one of the other coaches in the second team said, "I'll take you under my wing. I want you to play with me." Blah 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 blah. So I said, "Okay, I'm valued there. I'm going to go where I'm valued, and I'm going to go where I'm going to get game time." And then after a couple seasons, I found myself back on the first team. And I don't think I have a hard time remembering that because it's just not part of my experience, and I really remember. But that did happen. And then for me, especially going into the college realm, I got told no quite a bit in the recruiting process. You're too small. You're an average player. I literally had a coach email me back and says, "You're a mediocre player," and I was just like, "Oh, okay, all right." So you're going to get told a lot. You're going to get told no, and what you do with that no is ultimately what's going to decide what you're going to be and who you're going to be. For me, I'm the kind of person that if somebody tells me no, that's another no that stacks on top of my shoulder. And I play with the chip on my shoulder to say, somebody told me no. And this is why I'm going to push harder, right? Shoot, I go out and I train now just by myself. And if I'm going to do interval sprints or something like that, and I'm on the tail end of my suffering of doing a hard activity, the reason I push to the end is because somebody told me no. It was a coach somewhere. It was that I didn't get enough playing time, or somebody didn't trust me with the ball, or I went there and they didn't call me back, or a coach told me I was mediocre. Like I take no's to build on my drive. That is what I did. Is I go, you and you can tell me no, but somebody's going to tell me yes, and I'm going to work hard. And I think that's the difference between where players go and where they don't go, is that what you do from a coping perspective. You're going to get a lot of failures. Shoot, I'll go out and I'll shoot on goal. And if I'm not getting it right, can I control my emotions? Can I make the appropriate adjustments to make myself successful? Nobody's perfect. No one's a finished product. And no's are going to come. Failures are going to come. I've missed PK. I've gotten PK saved in pressure situation. I've been the one getting in on goal and I missed the goal. I was a person who turned over the ball and then we got scored on. There's things that have happened through my experiences that where now from the sideline, from a director perspective or coach perspective, nothing really flusters me because I've seen it before. I've experienced it before. And then when I come over to a player who's upset or frustrated or wants to quit, I say, you decide how you cope, right? You're the one that decides how you process failure or a no, right? And I had a player come up to me on Thursday evening this week that says, "What do you think my limit is?" And I'm not going to totally spoil your ambition, but I'm going to give you a realistic answer right now. But then I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to tell you what you need to do with that. Not that that's your limit, blah, blah, blah. Prove me wrong, right? It's just, I didn't say, no, you couldn't. I just said, this is where you're at right now. And how different players cope and manage failure and no's and rejection is the biggest thing. And this doesn't just apply to soccer, for Pete's sake. This is being a performer. This is being a hockey player, basketball player, being, a scientist. You're going to get told that you're not good enough. And whether or not you choose to let that consume you and you quit or you find something else, you have to be good with comfort of a passion or a pursuit, and you have to be comfortable with the discomfort. And I think that's the difference between being good and great. That's the difference between, kind of getting somewhere and where you don't get somewhere. There's a number of players that I've helped get recruited into college, and it's all shooting stars when they get recruited into college, and then they get there and they find out it's different challenges. And then you run into them 2 or 3 seasons later and they quit because they reach their limit of coping and rejection. And that's fine. Everybody's different, but in the development process from young age all the way into teenage years, adult, you're the one that chooses how resilient you are to that.
Yep. Fair enough. Hey, and you touched on it just a little bit ago about you being a coach and a director. Can you, let's fast forward. Playing days are over. What was your next chapter, moving from player to profession, when it came that time?
So for me, the thing that took me out of the any kind of high level playing pursuit was injury, right? So I had a big knee injury that took a heck of a lot of surgery. And, you know, I remember going into the surgeon's appointment with my mom and the surgeon saying, "Hey, you know what? Tell me where you want to go from here." And that was kind of a crossroads for me in the sense that it it took all of my coping and my all my coping mechanisms that I've worked in the playing space, and it put me in a recovery space, right? And it made me have to communicate clearly to this doctor and say, I want to give it a go again, right? I don't just want to, have a good need to have a family and walk down the street with my kids. Like that's not what I wanted. I said, can you get me back as close as you can as possible? And he goes, what does that mean? I said, I want to be able to ride my motorcycle. I want to be able to try and play high level again. And I want to just be able to play and kick a ball and snowboard and stuff like that. And he said, okay, I just need that communication because the cost of that is that you're going to have a big ugly scar on the side of your leg. And we're going to do I'm going to tell you what you're not going to have decisions on what we do, be it a cadaver versus, pulling from your hamstring and whatnot. He said, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do and you're going to go by it if that's what you want. I said, okay. So my mom was kind of in a panic because she didn't understand that choice. She didn't think it was okay for me to make a competitive decision instead of just a, how can we get you back to being okay decision. And at that point in my life, I just kind of put my hand up to my mom and say, I'm doing this for me. This has nothing to do with you. And so in that appointment, I said, get me back to where you want. So I still had some pursuit of trying to get back to it, but it segued me into the coaching realm, right? Where in the interim of my rehab and trying to get back to where I hopefully could play at a high level again, I slowly came to reality to saying, hey, if I can't play, I'm going to help. Right. So, and I'm going to, now granted, I tell you what, my early coaching experience, I was still a player. So I was still kind of volatile, right? Because I wanted every player to go have just as much drive as me and work just as hard as I've always worked and blah, blah, blah. And, you come to a place where that's maybe your highest denominator you're coaching to. But as soon as I stepped into coaching, I had to kind of have a little bit more of a nurturing experience with some of the players. And it made me more well-rounded in that experience. And so I was, by proxy of injury, threw me into coaching. And then from coaching, in that experience, and I kind of came to grips with saying, okay, with this bad of an injury at my certain age, no one's going to pay you to play. You know what I mean? No one's going to take you, hop a jet for you. No one's going to. So I was like, okay, let's transition into coaching. Let's try and use the vehicle of the game to continue my lifestyle and my profession. And at the same time, being able to expose players to someone who can mentor them and tell them about the different levels of the game. Now, what I had to grow up, my area of growth was realizing that not every player is that. And so I had to pick and choose my moments. And so even now, I recognize that I've had a certain amount of growth in the coaching space that then developed me into a director space that then allowed me to coach coaches how to coach. Which is a good experience. And you were a huge proponent in that as well, because I realized that, as good as a player as I thought I was, I still had stuff to learn. And then from a coaching perspective or an exposure and director perspective of how you manage all these different things, I'm still very aware that I have a lot to learn. And there's a lot of people in the soccer world that I can still learn from, you being one of them. I have a couple other mentors that I received once I got over into the larger game over in the Denver metro area, but it's definitely taught me that the game never ends. It just depends on where you want to go with it. Right. And there's still always ladders to climb. There's still always coaching licenses I can get. There's still always sessions I can go watch to learn the game a little bit more in depth. There's still something I can learn. Shoot, I ran a coach education last month with our coaches, and one of the coaches showed an activity and I go, I like that activity. I'm going to take it. I'm going to change a little bit, but I love it. I've never seen it. And I'm going to stay. And this is one of my coaches that I mentor. And I just, so you can still learn from everybody is what I'll say.
Yep. Well, and can you touch on a space that you seem to have immersed yourself in? Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know, last 4 or 5 years. And I feel like it delves into the cultural piece a little bit, and stealing a page out of Brazil's cap in futsal. yes, you coach the 11-11 side, it's outdoor, but you are very intentional about putting the club that you're a director at, being Skyline, and you're very influential at Rapids when you were there to start it from scratch. Correct me if I'm wrong there, as well as, hey, now we started it. Here's how we build it. And it's not just facilitating indoor games. It's saying, here's the methodology, because futsal has its own methodology. Can you speak to that a little bit for where you're at and what you do?
Yes. So futsal, obviously we grew up in, living in Colorado, you don't always have green space to play in during the wintertime. You don't always have the fancy indoor facilities. So Peter Hemmendinger, when he was running the club when we were youth, we got space in a church gym, and it was just kind of dusty old concrete, right? And you just set up some goals and played some futsal. So early exposures to futsal for me were through Peter Hemmendinger and his organization through the club. And we played futsal there through the winter, and I absolutely loved it. Right. Now, obviously, one of our teammates, once he got older, he broke his arm, and that was kind of scary, but because you're playing on a hard surface. But it was a scenario where I used to enjoy pulling up to that church gym and it being freezing cold outside. And then as soon as you step in and you strap on your futsal shoes, you're cooking. Right. And the thing that I fell in love with futsal was, in one breath, you're a defensive hero, and the next breath, you're the goal scorer. And you can do that in 10 seconds. And in an 11v11 setting, way more difficult to do that, way more difficult to be that impactful. Me being a hustle player, being smaller, my technique shined, my hustle ethic shined. And sometimes even shooting on a futsal goal, you don't have to use the best technique. They say just toe poke it and put it in the goal. So it was just one of those things that I really enjoyed, and I looked forward to it. And then once I got to Brazil, there was a lot of training that we did on the futsal courts. And that's what really opened my eyes to the methodology side of it, in regards to the tactics and how it's different. I remember getting thrown into my first training professional environment in futsal with Bragantino, and it was terrifying. Like I thought I was like, wow, I've played tons of futsal. This is gonna be fun. I got yelled at in the first 60 seconds in regards to the difference between marking, right? In soccer, marking is kind of general vicinity. In futsal, you literally have to be touch them. And I got yelled at to no end. And so I got thrown into a swimming pool without knowing how to swim kind of feeling. I learned very quickly. And those guys definitely, once they saw that I was coachable and adaptable, then I started to shine a little bit there as well. But just getting exposure in that space, even the tours we did where we played some futsal versus some kids, they're megging you and they're showing you a different level. Then once I got into the coaching experience after all the playing side, I took that idea and then I just infused it in what we did. So a good friend of mine over here in the Denver metro area, his name is Danny Woolliscroft. He's an English gentleman from in and around the Manchester area. Good guy. He's the one who got some futsal exposure in England. And so, he put his name on the futsal program, and I said, hey, I'll be your right-hand man. I'll help you out. Let's do this. And so put in a lot of time. We were doing a lot of training on turf to start, just because we didn't have the venue, right? So, and then not only that, then we were finding venues. We would go out to like concrete hockey rinks when it was warm enough. And so we did a lot of stuff. And, we got some futsal licensing through coaching, learned a little bit more of the intricacies of it. And then Danny segued away into a different club. And I was actually on top to be the futsal director for the Rapids. And in that interview process, they got a gentleman who is based out of Orlando, and his name is Rami Ferreira. And this gentleman had played professional futsal in Greece, Portugal, Brazil, so on and so forth. And he was Brazilian. And he was based out of Orlando, came in, obviously outshined me in regards to the coaching and methodology. So I ended up being his right-hand man, learned more in depth of the Brazilian methodology on how to teach the young ones all the way up to the older age groups, how to teach the 5 pillars of the game all in one session, how to get the players to think quickly, make faster decisions, to have courage to take players on, what you have to do to take players on, face forward, stuff like that. Simple player behaviors that translate into the outdoor game, but you do it all way faster. And then from there, I segued over to Skyline, where I'm currently at, started my own futsal program there. It's a profit share, so I get a pretty penny off of that. And I take that and I've made my own futsal program. We went from 8 teams to 14 teams between 2 winters. And we compete competitively. We take them to showcase, so on and so forth. I have players come up to me, doesn't matter if they're
When you
Rapids
say,
futsal players or Skyline players. Go ahead.
sorry, real quick, when you say showcase, you're not talking about you go to 11v11 showcases, you're going to futsal showcase.
Yes, we go to futsal showcases, and these environments are hugely adrenaline rushed because you're in a space where there's, instead of 2 or 3 fields in a general vicinity, you have 6 futsal courts, and you have parents that are right next to the courts, and they're shouting, and it's very fast paced. And you go to those showcase tournaments, and there's teams that are very, very good, high performing, and they start drawing crowds because of how quality the players are, and the players get infected with this adrenaline, right? And then when they're the player that scores the goal that needs to be scored, and there's people that just erupt, like the players get so addicted to it that I've even had some players that after we get done with the futsal showcase experience, what have you, and then we segue back out to outdoor grass fields, I ask them how they're doing, and they say, well, this is kind of boring, because they just got an adrenaline shot of the futsal experience, right? So culturally, futsal is used around the world for kids to get better technically and work on all 5 pillars of the game a heck of a lot faster. And then it just translates onto the grass. And I'm just trying to be a proponent of that. We live in the state of Colorado. We have winter time. There's no reason why there shouldn't be regular experience of training and competition. And, there's the arena soccer culture that's kind of come up in the United States, especially since the late 80s, stuff like that. But futsal is very, very fast. I'm a huge advocate of it. I want my players to become more autonomous in their decisions at a faster pace with better technique, and understand the 5 pillars of the game, and understand that just because your field gets bigger doesn't mean your brain doesn't think about all those phases of the game. And it gets the players to execute a heck of a lot faster when they're in a tight space. They know how to work 2v1s, 3v2s way faster with better technique. They get a little bit more creativity on the ball. They get more courage to take players on, stuff like that. So I'm just a huge fan of it.
Yeah, no, and I just want to piggyback real quick on a couple ideas. And one is with futsal, the one of the facets I probably love most about it is, and you already alluded to this, but it puts kids in so many more situations to make decisions, right?
Yes.
You have so many more transitional moments that don't last as long as the outdoor because the space is smaller. But again, you're dealing with that many more moments, and now you're multiplying and compounding on that, the opportunities that you're put in. I think you started with it. It's like you can go from defending a situation to becoming on the ending product of the situation realistically within 5-10 seconds. And you're just in so many more of those situations. And I think mentally, now that I'm thinking about it out loud, it also allows you to say, move on to the next play that much faster.
You have to.
Required to physically and mentally, and not, you don't have these elongated, the ball went out for a throw in because it got smashed 40 yards off the field. It's like, boom, quick restart. You got to be switched on. And I think it's a massive mental opportunity as well, not just a physical, technical, tactical.
Yes. And it's really a taste of fight or flight. So one of the things that I allude to in regards to parents and families when their kids are getting exposed to futsal competition, actual competition, is you're going to get your butts kicked. We're going to concede goals. We're going to come up against a team that moves the ball faster.
Why do you say that so confidently? Because it's still soccer.
I say that because, we in the intensity of futsal, the first experiences of futsal, we have to wipe up some tears of players who get shook. Their nervous system gets shook a bit. And so we have to give them a firm realization of that immediately.
So,
and
let me interrupt you real quick. Like, do you feel like there are good outdoor 11v11 players that just struggle in futsal?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Why?
So let me put it this way. I think there's a good number of outdoor teams that have a dribbler, right? In futsal, you have to pick and choose your moments. It's more of a pause and share experience. And then when we do create the moment, then you can shine on the dribble. But otherwise, you got to know when to share and not to dribble. Because unfortunately, the surface is faster. You'll dribble out of the real estate. There's just not enough room. Same thing on the opposite side of the spectrum. If you have a center back who has trouble anticipating play to pick off a pass, or you have a center back who just wants to clear the ball away, you make the rest of the team suffer when you're not multidynamic. You have to be able to share the ball or dribble the ball in appropriate scenarios. You have to be able to anticipate to pick off the pass better. Doesn't matter what position you're in for that matter. And you have to be able to know when to take a collective touch to pause the game and get the game to flow, right? And so getting those players to understand that in a high pressure situation on a faster surface, like I said, it shocks the nervous system a bit, but once they actually start to sharpen those skills and those situational analysis, they love it, right? And the affirmation that they receive and what it does to their psychological experience from an enjoyment perspective. I tell you, I have multiple kids that come to me and they share my sentiment that if I had a decision, if somebody came to me and say, we want you to play on a high level futsal team or this high level soccer team, I'd pick futsal every time. I pick futsal every time because I can be more influential defensively and offensively within a 10-second time span. So the perfect example, I was coaching a Rapids futsal team in Nationals and Worlds in Orlando one year. We were down by 2 goals with 2 minutes and 37 seconds left. We ended up winning by 1 because you can't give up. You have to carry on to the next play and you have to keep fighting. You never give up because in a 10-second span, we can score a goal, we can concede a goal, and you just have to keep working. Keep your mental state, even when the rest of the experience seems like it's on fire, you have to be able to center yourself and execute. And if you can't, it's okay. We run out of time. But you take that mentality and you apply it to 11v11 setting, then you get kids with a fire burning that they don't give up. And then other families and other players go, whoa, where does that kid get that fire that burns like that? I want that kid, right? And surprisingly enough, we just go, that's a futsal player, right? They don't give up. They work into the next 5 pillars of the game based on what's happening, and they do it quickly and they do it efficiently. That's it in a nutshell.
Yep. Yeah. And I guess some concluding thoughts on my end that come to mind. One, again, for our audience that might not know this, in Brazil, they're playing futsal until realistically 12, 13, 14 years old. Those kids aren't touching 9v9, 7v7, 11v11. Like it is just futsal, and that's normal.
Yes.
I remember when I had the opportunities to coach teams more on a regular than I do today, I was very intentional of bringing a futsal ball, even in the grass space, bringing in tennis balls. Like I came across some different coaches that had just some different ideas, and I ate that stuff up just because, again, from a mental standpoint, it's one thing to go through a technical activity with a regular size 4 or size 5. Do that same activity with a futsal ball. Do that same activity with one of those dodge balls that are super bouncy. Do the same activity with a tennis ball. And all of a sudden you're engaging our players in a little bit different way. Now they have to concentrate so much better. So, and again, they have to be switched on versus be like, oh, we've done this before. Right. And I think that's just such a healthy twist that is so easy for coaches to manipulate their environment versus feel like you're letting kids off the hook by making it easy on yourself just because you know your session inside out. I think you're not allowing them to ultimately bring out their full potential, in my opinion. What are your thoughts with some of those ideas of differential training, of bringing in a futsal ball every now and then, even in an outdoor setting?
Absolutely. So I take time to do individual training sessions with certain players, and just like you, implement the use of tennis balls, mini balls, and before we even get to their full size ball, be it for a full size ball, which is either a size 4 or size 5, right? So part of it is also comfort. So if I'm working with a younger player who's not comfortable trapping with the thigh or the chest, right? A smaller ball doesn't seem as, hurtful, is a good intro. But then challenging these players to understand if you can control this tennis ball even slightly. And I tell the kids, it's going to be a nightmare at the beginning. Like there's no way around it. It's going to make the mini ball a little bit more manageable. And then once we get to the size 4, size 5, then you realize, whoa, this thing is a balloon. And I can certainly have more room for error, right? Parents who even watch the sessions, they see that firsthand. One of the first activities I have all players do in my individual sessions is they juggle a tennis ball for about 4 minutes. Then they juggle a mini ball for 4 minutes. And then right away, they go to their full size ball, be it 4 or 5. And what that does to your brain from a control perspective is mind blowing. Like I encourage anybody to try that. You don't even have to take an individual session with me. Just get a tennis ball, juggle it, or attempt to juggle it for 4 minutes. Then get a mini ball. You can find those at a sporting goods store. And most people don't really understand the purpose of those, but they're for skills and juggling. So you juggle that for 4 minutes and then right away get your big ball and then start juggling. It will, like, what it does from your motor skill focus perspective is crazy. And I actually introduced that to a PSL player who just finished up his college stuff. And I introduced that to him one time in training. And he's like, I do that every time he goes out and does his own repetition stuff. He starts with that. He starts with a tennis ball, the mini ball, the size 5, just because it sharpens up his touch and it makes his controlled touch out of the air more comfortable, number one, but more manageable. And it's putting yourself on different surfaces, giving yourself different challenges. You know, you watch videos of Maradona, he's juggling a golf ball, he's juggling an orange, he's doing all this, you know, it's really just repetition, right? If you can play a grand piano, can you play a mini keyboard? That's really all it is. Like, are you diversifying what you can do with a ball, right? One of the best artists with the ball is Ronaldinho. He started off with futsal. He made himself infamous by scoring out on how many goals in a futsal game, right? And then that's how he ballooned into this god of the game, right? Is his artistry with the ball. And it really started with a different surface, with a different kind of ball. And it just got to go from there. And then you look, you see what these guys can do with the ball and you go, that is unreal. But when you actually talk to them about how much repetition they've gotten, then they go, okay, that kind of makes sense. I just haven't done it. Right. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, I appreciate the time that you've taken. I also appreciate that. I feel like in this session, you spoke to the player, you spoke to the parent, you spoke to the coach. So I think regardless of who you are out there that is a listener, my challenge and what I would really hope that you do is give it that share to that person in your sphere. You'll know better than Steve and I who this can help hit home the most for. So we would definitely appreciate that, because again, that's where anybody's going to evolve and develop is getting some different ideas and some better ideas to streamline their pathway, right? And it's always going to be unique in that in and of itself. So again, want to thank our audience out there, and Steve, thank you again for taking the time. So guys, checking out for now. Until next month. This is this month. Appreciate it.